If you had a microscope and could look at a piece of a leaf, you would see thousands of tiny openings which branch out until the leaf has all of the materials it needs. What happens now?
Hello, and welcome to the first lesson. I just want to say right off the bat, congratulations to you. I'm very proud of you for signing up for this class, which I don't think was an easy thing for you to do. This is definitely going to be a challenge, and there's going to be lots of homework, and there might be times where you're frustrated. But I've been teaching for a long time, and I know, A, that I can keep this really fun and engaging for you, and also B, that you really will learn the basics of After Effects by the end of this class, all right? So stick with it, and I'm very proud of you for signing up, okay? I remember learning After Effects a long time ago, and just how excited I felt about it, and how cool I thought it was. And I still think it's super cool, so I'm really hoping to bring that excitement to you and to just give that to you as a gift, okay? So today we're going to actually cover a ton. We're actually going to talk about the basics of how to animate pretty much anything in After Effects today, which is obviously a huge topic, right? Along the way, I'm also going to show you a bunch of keyboard shortcuts that I think will save you a ton of time, okay, and which I use. So I kind of want to introduce those right at the beginning for you. And finally, I'm going to work on a homework which is very much like your homework, that I designed basically to be very similar to your homework, so that you can kind of like slow down and watch me work and observe the way I do things, and I'm hoping that that will give you a better sense also of how to kind of approach your homework, all right? So let's jump into After Effects and start talking about the real basics of animation. Okay, I know we took a bunch of the following steps when we did 25 steps to creating your first animation, but we went so quickly there, I'm not really sure exactly what sunk in, so I'm going to definitely go over some of those points again, all right? So here we are in After Effects, and this up here is your project window. I have a couple of things loaded in here, but theoretically, if you opened After Effects, this would be blank, okay? But down here at the bottom of your project window, there is this button here for creating a new composition. And I know we did this in 25 steps, but let's press this again and talk about this. Okay, I definitely always want to make sure that you use this preset, HDTV 1080-2997. And I don't think I really explained in 25 steps that the width and height of this are 1920 pixels by 1080 pixels. Okay, so that's what that 1080 refers to, is the width of the comp in pixels. All right, everything's always measured in pixels here. And for the duration, you could set this to whatever you want at the start. It probably will default to being 30 seconds, right? And that's totally fine. So I think everything else here makes sense. We sort of went over the frame rate, 2997, which we'll think of as 30, and square pixels, and don't worry about any of this stuff. You can also give this a name, as we did in 25 steps, whatever. And I'll call that animation, which I always spell wrong, and hit OK. All right, so now basically it looks the same, but we have this kind of like timeline open here in our timeline window. And you know, you can't see it, but theoretically this is now an active composition window up here. Okay? So the first thing that we're going to do, which we did already once, is create a new solid, and that is Command Y. And that opens up this solid settings, and I'm going to go ahead and just, you know, you could choose the color here and pick whatever you want. I'm going to choose this dark blue because that's fine for what we're talking about. And now that I've set that, I'm not really going to animate that in this lesson, so what I can do is go over here, select the name, press return, hit BG, which is what I call the background layer, right? Press return again, and remember that's how you name anything in After Effects. You select it, press return, type in the name, and then press return again. And now what I'm going to do is lock this layer, okay? So that I can't just grab this by accident with my mouse. And this button over here is the lock button for any layer. You just lock that, okay? So far so good, and we've kind of been over this. What I'm going to do is make a few shapes now. And I'm going to use this sort of shape tool that's up here, which we haven't talked about yet. And we'll talk about this a lot more in greater detail, right? So I'm going to go up here and click that. And then just say I want a yellow square or something. I think we talked about this a little bit. I would change the color to yellow here and then hit OK. And now I can just sort of like draw my square on screen like that, right? We sort of did that again in 25 steps, so this isn't completely new to you. And then I'm going to take this and I'm going to select my layer, press return, and name this square. Because it's always good to get into the habit of naming your layers right away, so you don't drive yourself crazy. And I'm going to press return again, so that's now there. All right? And let's go ahead and make 3 shapes right off the bat so we can talk about this. this. So I'm going to go up here and I'm going to pull down on this shape layer menu till it opens kind of this other little menu here. I still have it selected. I'm going to choose my ellipse tool, and I'll go over here and choose a new color for this. Just say something really nice and bright, like light pink, okay? And I will make a light pink circle right there, and I will again select this and hit return and name this circle, which I spelled right this time, unlike most times. And then finally, I'm going to choose a pen tool up here, or the pen tool, I should say. Not just a pen tool, but the pen tool up here. Okay, this has an additional pull-down menu as well, but we just want the regular pen tool. Okay, shortcut for that is G, and shortcut for the regular arrow is V. Okay, same as Photoshop, but G is not the shortcut in Photoshop or Illustrator, only in After Effects for the pen tool. Okay, now that I've got that selected, I'm going to choose a new color by clicking here, and choose something obnoxious like green, and now with my pen tool, what I'm going to do is just make a polygon by kind of clicking and making sort of a random shape of this, right? And you'll see that when I'm going to undo that, right? And when I'm just about to make the last point of my polygon, you can see like a little circle appear next to the cursor, and that means it's going to be making the last point here, like that. Okay, great. So let me also select this and press return and name this polygon. Okay, so additionally, in order to help us organize this, I want to color these layers, okay? Just in case it's not clear now, we've made these layers, and these layers now default to existing for the entire 30 seconds that I set the composition length at. If you set the duration to something else, they would default to being that length, right? They always default to being the length of the composition at start. And just so you know, these here are the layers, okay? These long things represent the same thing as these layers here, which are these shapes, right? Okay, so what I'm going to do is to make these even clearer at a glance what they are, I'm going to click on this little tab here, this little color tab, right? And that will give me the ability to change these to some different colors. And we'll go over this again more later. And you will actually have different colors in here because I've customized these. But I'm going to label this one green because it's sort of a green color, right? And the circle layer is pink, so I will pull this down and give this pink color. And the square is yellow, so I'll pull this down and give it a yellow color. And I could even, if I wanted, to unlock my background layer, right? Select it, and then pull this down and give it one of my blue colors, which I think you probably only have one, but I have two because I'm special. And I think later on I show you how to customize that as well, so awesome. And I'm going to lock this again. Okay, so now we have these things, and they're just a little bit easier to tell at a glance what they are because the colors correspond, all right? Whatever you could do in After Effects to make it easier for you to comprehend these layers, I definitely recommend, because the further you get into your After Effects career, you'll have hundreds of layers in these timelines, and whatever you can do to make it easier for yourself to understand what they are, you should definitely do that, okay? Definitely naming your layers and giving them colors are really important. All right, that's my little spiel on that. So let's go ahead and talk about something really, really, really important. And let's look at the polygon for a sec. I have this little triangle here, which I can twirl down, right? And then I reveal sort of two things under here. The contents, which I don't want to worry about now, and we're going to talk a ton about some other time in a different class, right? But what I do want to talk about are this thing that says transform here, which if I twirl this down, we can now see these other, what are known as properties, okay? And these are the basic properties for every single layer in After Effects, no matter what it is, except for audio, okay? You'll always have these same properties. And these represent, essentially, the most basic ways that we can change anything about a property. All right? This is really important to kind of understand, and I think you will. And I want to roll through all of these because these are all super, super important. Okay? So the anchor point is not something that you're ever going to animate, okay? But it's really important for you to understand what it is and what it means and what it does. Okay? So the anchor point essentially is I'm going to turn these off for a sec. And I just turned the eyeball off for these two layers so that they're not on screen anymore, right? I'm going to get a little closer to this. So the anchor point right now for this polygon defaulted to being at the center of the screen, right? If we hit this button right here, title action safe, it will tell us exactly where the center of the screen is, and I'll zoom in on that, and that's what this crosshairs is there. And you can see that the anchor point lined up right there by default. And that's the way it did on our 25 steps too, which is why when it scaled down and rotated, it rotated toward the center of the comp, right? But this anchor point can be changed and it can be moved anywhere you want it to be. Generally speaking, it's often really helpful to have it in the center of the layer, I should say, and not of the comp. The way you would move that is by choosing this funky tool up here, which is the pan behind tool, right? And the shortcut for that, by the way, is the letter Y. And that will allow you to move the anchor point freely without moving the layer around. I'm going to undo that, okay? If I choose V for my normal arrow and I move the anchor point, you'll see that I'm now moving the entire layer, okay? So that's the difference in terms of anchor point, I'm going to undo that, between the V arrow, the normal selection arrow, and the pan behind tool. The pan behind tool allows us to move the anchor point without moving the layer. And that's something that's going to become incredibly important for us. So again, anchor point's not something that we animate, but it's something that we have to always think about. So you'll start getting used to that. Okay, position, this is fairly obvious, I think. Except for what's not obvious is that the values are listed as X and Y coordinates. Okay, that might have just made you feel weird, but it's a math thing, so that's why the X-axis is the horizontal axis and the Y-axis is the vertical axis. In other words, X equals left and right, and Y equals up and down on screen, right? So I can change the values of this as a whole by, like I did before, using my V arrow and grabbing this. And as I move this around, you can see down there next to the word position that those values are changing. And because I'm kind of moving it all around in a circle, they are changing for both the X and the Y at the same time. I'm going to undo that to put it back where it was. Now, if I just grab the value this way with my cursor, and you can see that I get this new little like hand with a little arrow on it, I can just move just the X or just the Y values by kind of just adjusting this value, right, to the left and to the right. Or I can move the Y value by moving this that way to the left and right too, which actually makes it move up and down, right? If I hold down on Shift, I will kind of add a multiplier to this, so that's kind of an easier way to go. So that's kind of position. It's you're just sort of moving the position of the layer, so I think that's kind of the most obvious one. Scale refers to the size of a layer, okay? So right now, all layers default to being at 100% of their scale. That's how they either come in from other programs like Illustrator or Photoshop, which we'll talk about a lot more, or even when you make a shape here in After Effects, the way that we just did, it defaults to being 100% of its size. After Effects kind of assumes that's the size that you want it to kind of start at. That's the 100% size, right? You can scale this all the way down to 0, right, by just like twirling this down or by clicking in here and typing the word 0, I mean the number 0. And then what you'll see is that it's scaled all the way down to 0, and now it's not even, you can't even see it on screen anymore because it is so tiny. And the keen After Effects observer will notice that when I scale this up and down, it scales up and down toward and away from, I should say, its own anchor point. So that when this goes down to 0, like in 25 steps, it's essentially just disappearing into the exact center of the anchor point, right? The other weird thing about scale is that you can actually scale something negatively in After Effects. So then it sort of does this like opposite thing like that, right? So that's kind of interesting, and that's in a way a different way of flopping an object, okay? And I should also point out that, now let me put this back to 100. I can also unchain scale and work just the X, which stretches it out that way, the X-axis, right, the horizontal, like I just said, or I could scale it, you know, this way on the Y-axis, up or down, right? So unchained scale is kind of an interesting thing, maybe not with a shape like this, but at other times it can be really useful, so I want to point that out. And I'm going to just set these back to 100 and chain that back up again, so it's sort of back to normal. And now we get to rotation. Now rotation obviously makes sense. It makes things rotate, and what doesn't necessarily make sense about rotation is the way that the values are listed, okay? So I think I went over this in 25 steps, but just again, because we went so fast, these are whole rotations. Like if you want this thing to rotate like 5 whole times, you would type a 5 in there 5 times. And then these are degree rotations, so you could set it to like 45 degrees or something like that. And I should also point out, again, that rotation, a layer rotates around its anchor point. So if I choose the pan behind tool like this, and I select this little corner right here of the layer. I can even get in real close and make sure that it's right on the corner, and I'll pull back. And now when I rotate this, it rotates around that corner, right? So anchor point, really, really, really important, like I said, for rotation and scale. Finally, here is opacity. Something that's 100% opaque means you can't look through it at all, okay? Versus like something that's 100% transparent. Opacity and transparency are the opposites, basically. So that when something's at 100% opacity, it's completely, you can't see through it. When it's at 0 opacity, it's completely transparent, all right? So basically, if I, for example, want to make this fade out, I would sort of set a keyframe, which we'll talk about in a sec, at 100, and then fade this down to 0. And then that animation would be a fade out of that layer from 100 to 0. Okay? So those are the basic transform properties for any layer that you'd ever have in After Effects. And I hope that makes sense because we'll be working with those a lot. And I think it does make sense. So, you know, what I hinted to before was about making a keyframe. And making a keyframe is super, super important because a keyframe is essentially telling After Effects that for any layer, for example my polygon, that we can set any of those properties. For example, let's work with opacity, okay? We could set at this moment in time, which is right at the beginning of my composition, which I can move around in time as you know by moving this. At this moment in time, for this layer, right, this polygon, for the property of opacity, I'm going to set a keyframe that says that the opacity is 100% at this exact moment in time. And the way that I make my first keyframe, and this is super important, I'm going to keep talking about this because it's a little bit easy to forget or get confused about, but the way you make your first keyframe for any property in After Effects, always, basically, is to press this button here, okay? It's supposed to look like a stopwatch, but it's gotten a lot more abstracted over the years, but think of that as the stopwatch button, okay? They've made it kind of a sleeker icon over the years, and it kind of looks less like a stopwatch to me, but that's what it's supposed to be, because it's sort of like pressing the stopwatch to start something, okay? So if I press this now, you can see a couple of things have just happened. For one, the stopwatch button, it turned blue, and now it has like a little time indicator thing in it right there. It might be a little bit hard to see. Secondly, this lit up over here, which previously there wasn't even anything over there, I don't think. Nope. And finally, the most important thing is that right here you can see where, you know, concurrently where our current time indicator is, which is this thing. It has dropped a keyframe, okay? And if I'm going to move this, and now you can see this keyframe. It's like a little diamond-shaped thing. And again, just to go over that again, that means that at this moment in time, at 0000 frames, okay, for my polygon layer, the opacity is 100%. Okay? And so what that means is I can move forward now in time, right, and change this value. And this is really, really important too, because this is how you make an animation in After Effects, all right? By setting one keyframe and then moving in time and then setting another keyframe. Okay, so that's what I'm going to do. And the way that I do that is not by clicking on the stopwatch button again, because what that will do is actually erase my keyframe, as you see here. So I'm going to undo that. Got my keyframe back. Now what I have to do to make a new keyframe is change this value. And what I'm going to do is slide this down till it's at 0. Now with opacity, you can't go under 0, like with scale, because you can't be more than fully transparent. It just doesn't make sense, right? And so now you'll see I can still see the outline of that layer, but only because I've clicked on it. So it's sort of still there, but if I click off of it, you will now see that it's not there. And I'm actually going to go down here and turn off this title action safety because I don't think we need this anymore, okay? And now, if I scrub through this animation by moving my current time indicator, you can see that that fades out. All right? And let's preview this and talk about how to preview stuff also at the same time. Two important steps that we need to take, which we went over in 25 steps, but first thing I need to do is shorten my work area, because right now my composition is 30 seconds long, and I've made an animation that lasts, let's see, 24 frames, okay, which is almost 1 second. So if I preview this now, I will preview 1 second of animation, and then we will literally be watching this blue screen do absolutely nothing for 29 seconds, which is an eternity, okay? I'm not even going to do it right now and make you watch it because it'd be so long. So what we need to do is set our work area back. I know we talked about this, but I'm just going to grab the end of my work area here till I get this new little cursor that looks like that, and I'm going to pull this back. And what that means now is I can preview just the animation and not watch 29 blank seconds, okay? And the way that you would preview is by pressing the, for you I'm going to recommend spacebar. So go back to the beginning of your comp and press spacebar, and now you can see the animation happen, and it's going to happen in a loop, going from the beginning to the end of the work area. And there you see it. We've created an animation. Congratulations. So this now goes from 100% of opacity to 0% of opacity, and thus it is fading out. Okay, so that's basically how you do animation in After Effects. Thank you very much. No, just kidding. But that really is basically how you do it. And an important thing to note is if I want this animation to be faster, I can take this keyframe, which is something I can just select, by the way. And here, I'm going to zoom in a little bit by, here, let's do this by moving this little button up, right? So this is sort of like little mountains and big mountains, so that kind of shows you zooming in and out. So now I'm closer to this, right? And now I can actually see that if I want, I can take this keyframe, right, and move it closer or farther from the first keyframe, and that will influence the animation timings. The farther you move them apart, the slower the animation will happen because it's happening over more time. All right? So this is a really important thing to remember about After Effects, is that you can move these keyframes around to get different timings. And we're going to do this a ton. This is basically an animator's life. So now if I make this 15 frames long, we can preview this by going back to the beginning and pressing spacebar. And it'll loop, right? And there now you can see that the animation is just fading out for longer. All right? Cool. So now, even though this is fading out and we have one animation on this layer, we can still stack many more animations on this layer. For example, position or scale or rotation. So since we went ahead and set the anchor point to our corner in that really nice way, let's go ahead and I'm going to set the rotation back to 0 and go back to the beginning of my comp here, and I'm going to press the stopwatch button to make a new rotation keyframe, the first rotation keyframe, right? Now I'm going to move till where my other keyframe is when it's completely faded out, right? And now I'm going to just change this rotation value to something else, just say 180 degrees. So I'm going to click in there, and then I'm going to type the value 180. Again, not here, because that's full rotations, and then it would rotate 180 times in 20 frames, which would be like kind of ridiculous, all right? So a nicer and a slower rotation like that. And let's watch that down. Right? The first time it plays it, it probably plays it at like kind of a varying speed, and then the second time it should be playing it in real time. All right? So there you go. Now we've added multiple animations. Again, we could take this and we could make this faster, and we could watch that down, and it would look like that. Right? Just faster. And okay, so that's great. So you can stack multiple animations on one layer. You could animate all these properties at the same time for it, but what I'm going to do actually is now turn on my circle and show you how we can animate, you know, different parts of that. And here's something cool about a circle. I want to animate the scale of this, and what I want to do actually is set the anchor point into the center so that the circle kind of scales up on its own center, right? So again, I actually still have my pan tool selected from before, but if I had my V arrow selected, my selection arrow selected, I would press Y to choose my pan behind tool. And then I can even press this button right here, which I haven't talked about, which is the solo button. And then I will be able to see my circle on its own, right, if I want. So now I can kind of zoom into this, and with my pan behind tool selected, I can grab the anchor point, and I'm going to hit Command, and that's going to kind of click that anchor point right into the center of the circle. And we'll talk about that more. And now I'm going to unsolo my circle, so I can now see everything else again too, right? And now I want to select my polygon here and press U, okay, and that will reveal all of the animated properties that are going on in there. And then now what I'm going to do is select my circle, and I will twirl down on this arrow here, and then twirl down on the transform folder here. I can close that up. Again, we'll talk about that contents later in another class. But here, let's work on the circle's scale. Okay, so let's see. And you know, another thing is that the keyframes don't all have to like kind of be at the same timings. The keyframes can be wherever. So I think the circle might be kind of a little bit kind of hidden here by this. So the first thing I'm going to do is just select my V arrow and just kind of move this over here just so we can see it. Okay. And what I'm going to do is click on the words, the number 100 under scale here and type 0. And then I'm going to go ahead at my first frame, or I can move to like a few frames down, doesn't really matter, like 4 frames. And then I will click the stopwatch button to make the scale keyframe. Remember, always have to click the stopwatch button to make the first keyframe. And now I'm going to jump ahead in time, and let's see, while this is fading out, I will have this scale up just to be like that big or something, okay? 600 times bigger than it originally was, right? So let's watch that down at the same time and see what that looks like. Right? So that starts, and then the green starts and then fades out, and then the pink circle kind of fades up. And even while the pink circle is fading up, for example, it could still move. It could fade up also. You could have it do any of these transformations. The position, the rotation, or the opacity all at the same time. For example, we could have it move. Like I could go here to the beginning of the first keyframe and press the stopwatch button. Yep. And move ahead in time, and now I could, for example, move the circle over here, and we could watch that animation down. It would look like this. Right? Multiple properties could be animated on multiple layers all at the same time. And again, the keyframe timings could be changed. This could be made faster, and now it looks like this. Right? So, things don't necessarily have to line up. Either the position and the scale could be lined up differently now, and let's see what that would look like. So it's a little awkward actually, because it sort of starts to scale up and then it moves over and then it sort of stops and then it keeps scaling up. So in that case, I don't think that looks so good, but I'm just saying you can do that, right? Keyframes do not need to line up like this, all right? So let's also look at our square here for 1 second. I'm going to turn this on, and there it is. And let's animate. Let's do the position of this and the rotation and the opacity. Let's throw the kitchen sink at this one, all right? So while this is happening here, let's have the square, start, I don't know, let's see, up here somewhere. Oh, and the anchor point is still in the center of the comp. So what we can do is change that if we want. Select the pan behind tool and kind of snap this and hold Command and put that back in the center. Or, for example, we could have this scale from its own bottom or from the corner or wherever we want it. I'm just choosing the center right now just because that's sort of my default. But it could be anywhere. So let's see. Let me make a position keyframe. And actually, while I'm on the position keyframe, I'm going to change this value and have it move like up here somewhere. So I didn't make a new keyframe because the current time indicator was on the keyframe already. But if I were to move the current time indicator, obviously, and then move this square, now that one keyframe has been made, it makes the other one because one has already been made, right? So we moved in time and changed the value. So now kind of that's happening. And we could at the same time have this rotate, just say like 1 full rotation. So I'd click in here and type 1, right? So like that. And now it sort of rotates and moves down at the same time like this. And rotation, you do have to be careful with rotation because things when they rotate very, very quickly like that, they get a little kind of stroby, like they're a little hard to see. So rotation is something you want to maybe work a little slower, right? In any case, there you go. There's like a really simple animation. And what we could do is select all the layers by pressing Command A, and then press U, and now we can see all of our keyframes again. Here they are. And that's not too difficult. And of course, keyframes, we could make further keyframes down the road. For example, we could have the opacity of the polygon fade back up. I could have it, I could select this keyframe and copy and paste it, right? So that now is just like, basically just holds the value of 0 right there the whole time because this is 0 and this is 0, so nothing changes. And then we could have this like fade back up at the end and then, rotate, I could make a rotation keyframe and then rotate it like, this, and now we could watch that animation. Pretty snazzy there, all right? Okay, so I'm really hoping that this makes sense. It's not that complicated, but if you're finding that you're still confused, just remember these basic rules, okay? To make your first keyframe for any layer, for any property ever in After Effects, you always have to press the stopwatch, okay? That's really important to get. And then to make the next keyframe and any other keyframe for that property, okay, you have to move in time and change the value. All right? I think this makes sense to you if you're starting to get it, okay? The other thing is just to remember all those basic transform properties: anchor point, position, scale, rotation, and opacity. Those are really all important, and they're all pretty different, and so they all have their little subtle nuances about them, okay? So those are really good things to keep in mind as we go forward, all right? So I am going to move forward, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to now work on the little thing that I designed, which is like your homework. And I just want you to kind of follow along with me. I am giving you this project, right? Here it is. So you can actually complete this project on your own after watching this if you want. You don't have to, but I thought it might be nice just in case you wanted to, or you could kind of follow along with me with it. Right, so let me explain what is going on here. So I've got 4 different scenes here, and it's already all laid out in terms of timing, and all the layers are in place here, you should notice. Here's my layers, and I've color-coded them. And obviously these are from Adobe Illustrator, which we'll talk about how to do that, import stuff from Illustrator later, I think in the next lecture. But I don't want you to really worry about that for now. Just know that we have these 4 scenes, and this is true in your homework too, and they're all driven by a sort of an arrow kind of a thing here, right? So in this first scene, the arrow will come on from off screen, and it'll kind of land here, and then it will grab this little white button and slide it over until they're over here together, right? And then the arrow will fly off screen. Okay, so that's the first little shot. In the second shot, the arrow flies in from the side, and it lands here, and then it clicks, and then it turns on this, which is going to make it look like that turned it white, basically. And then it's going to kind of grab that and move that over and line it up exactly with this identical one, right? And then the arrow will move off. And then the next shot, the arrow will come in from the side, and it will kind of grab this box and move it over so that the edge of the box here lines up with the edge of that arrow. And same with the blue box. So it'll kind of come in and grab them and move them over, right, one at a time. And then move off screen. And then in the final scene, the arrow will come on, and it will land on this button, and it will click on it, and it will turn it blue, like that, right? And then what will happen is I have this blue slider that's going to kind of fill up and go brrrr, and fill that up when it's to indicate that it's finished. And that will all happen by the end of the comp or composition, and then the mouse will move off screen, I suppose. Okay? So that's the action. So let's go ahead and animate that. All right? First thing that I would do is, okay, go back here to the beginning, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to I want my work area to just be the length of this first shot, and there's actually a really nice shortcut for that. I'm going to select it and hit Option Command and B, and that will kind of snap my work area to just that length of this, whatever was selected, basically, right? So that's kind of cool. And now let's think about this. The arrow is going to kind of come in from the side and land here. And this is actually a really good spot where I designed this for it to land, all right? Because it's going to kind of move that button over. So I don't want it to be at this position at the first frame of the comp. I kind of want it to be in that position, I think about 15 frames in, or like half a second in, just so it takes about half a second to get there, right? So I would select this layer, and then knowing that I want to animate the position, I'm going to press P, and that will reveal the position property for that layer, okay? If I had pressed S, I would have revealed the scale. If I had pressed R, I would have revealed the rotation. And if I had pressed T, I would have revealed the opacity, okay? So a little device for you there. P, S, R, and T will open up those properties. So that's really useful. Okay, so now that I've pressed P and have my position open, I can click on the stopwatch, that's right, and make my first keyframe here. And now I'm not at the beginning of the comp, it doesn't really matter. I could make my first keyframe anywhere. So now I'm going to drag the current time indicator back to the beginning of the comp, right? And we'll see now that we're at 00000. And what I'm going to do is kind of get in here a little bit closer, and I'm going to grab my arrow by the anchor point, okay, and just move it off screen here. And you can see right away that this creates a position path or a motion path that is what the arrow follows as it moves on, right? And we'll talk more about the position path in other classes, but I just wanted to kind of point that out. You could see at a glance that this is now a moving layer, right? So that kind of comes in, right, and it stops. And then what we want it to do is pause, okay? And this is actually really important because the next thing that's going to happen is this is going to move over to here, and it's going to move this, drag, what I'm calling this drag circle too, with it, right? But just say that, we wanted another to take like another 20 frames, for example, for this mouse now to move over here, right? And drag, just say it's dragging that circle with it. Just imagine that, okay? What's going to happen is if I play this animation down, it's going to come on, and then it's not going to pause there. It's just going to come on and move directly over. Here, watch. Right? It comes on, and then it slows down, and just kind of, but it doesn't pause there. And a human being, if they were actually selecting this, they'd kind of like pause there for a second, because your brain would be kind of like changing gears. It's like moving this way, and then you kind of pause, and then you kind of move it that way, right? So the way I'm going to delete this keyframe here for 1 sec, and the way that we would build a pause in is by essentially, moving in time a little bit. It doesn't really matter at this point because we'll adjust the timings later, but I'm going to take this keyframe here, which represents this arrow in this position, and I'm going to copy, and paste that right there, okay? So now I've built a little pause in because this value doesn't change at all between here and here. So this, I'm kind of like animating it to stay in the same place, right? And now I can like just say move down a little bit in time. Oh, and by the way, if you hit page down, you move 1 frame toward the end of the comp, and page up moves you 1 frame toward the beginning of the comp, and shift page down moves you 10 frames toward the end of the comp, and shift page up moves you 10 frames toward the beginning of the comp. So if I'm here, I'm going to hit shift and page down, just say once is fine, and now I've moved 10 frames, okay? And now this is actually interesting. This is the point at which I can move this arrow over, but I want to move both the arrow and the drag circle at the same time so that they move exactly the same number of pixels together. So actually, before I move forward in time, I'm going to go back to this keyframe here, right? And now I'm going to select my drag circle and press P to reveal the position for that. And now I'm going to, yes, that's right, click on the stopwatch and make my first position keyframe for my drag circle, okay? And that one's in the same exact timings as the sort of pause keyframe that I built for the arrow, okay? Now I can hit shift page down and move 10 frames, and I'm going to select both of these layers. I hit shift and I selected both, right? And now I'm going to slide them both over together, and you can see that it's making 2 different paths now, a yellow one and a blue one. I'm going to put this kind of here, I guess, something, so I've got a nice little edge there, and it can kind of imitate the edge there, I suppose. It looks about right. And so now you can see, here, let me play this down, you can actually see what happened. Right? So it comes in, and it kind of pauses for a tiny little beat, and then it moves it over, right? And if we wanted to increase that pause, all we would need to do is take this set of keyframes, which represents the slide over for both layers, and move that back, right? So now if I move it way back, there's a longer pause, right? And it's really your job as an animator, and this is kind of what animators work on, is determining the length of things like those pauses, because this keyframe timing here is so important. This is what makes, at least at the start, a very good animation different from a not so good animation. So this is the kind of thing you want to pay attention a lot to, is the keyframe timing. So obviously I think this pause is too long, so I'm going to kind of move this back to like there. And I work personally, the way that I work a lot is very visually. I sort of lay out my keyframes and think that, a lot of times I base my choices, at least initially, on just the way it looks to me in the composition. Now, I've been working in After Effects for a long time, so I can kind of do that. But I know that basically you just need to set keyframes, and then later you can always change the timings on them. That's the way that I work. I don't worry so much about the timings at first. I worry about the values and the position of things, and then later I change the timings, right? So I'm just going to move a little bit forward here. I don't know how long. And now I need to animate the arrow rather, to move off screen, okay? So I can now close down my circle, my drag circle, because I don't need to think about those timings anymore, though if I adjust them, I do need to think about them later. And now I need to once again make essentially a pause right here for this arrow. Another way that you could do this, rather than copying and pasting this is a little button over here, which we haven't talked about. Well, actually, I think we did in 25 steps, but again, we went quickly, so I'll go over it again. What this button is it'll make a keyframe for whatever value the values happen to read at the moment. So because there's no animation happening after this, I know that the value isn't changing at all after this, right? Because it's not animated. So I can go ahead and make a keyframe there by clicking this, and you see it made a keyframe there. And those have the exact same values on that keyframe as here. So it's kind of the same thing as copying and pasting, all right? And now I'm going to move to the end of my comp, and I'm just going to take this and kind of drag this off this way till it's off screen, all right? And then I'm going to maybe drag this a few more frames because that looked a little bit tight in there. And let's preview this. Yeah, it's a little confusing to watch it on a loop, I know, but this is the way you work in After Effects. You watch your previews on a loop. And so it looks like this button kind of jumps back when it's done, but I think the timings here look pretty good. I think maybe it's a little bit fast when it comes on, but I like the move over and I like the move off. So what I'm going to do is just move this keyframe a few more frames that way. Yeah, so it's a little bit slower coming on, right? And as you start to animate more in After Effects, you will develop the eye to see small differences in timings, I promise. If that didn't look like any different to you, it's just because I've been doing this a really long time, all right? And I just want to stress again that if I select my drag circle and press U, these keyframes, they have to line up with each other. If I were to have dragged this and changed the timings here, and it was off from the drag circle now, let's see what that looks like. Right? So one starts, the drag circle moves first and then the arrow catches up with it. So that's the kind of like small errors that I'm going to make sure that you're not putting in your work. And the best way to do that is to zoom just way in, okay? You can use this thing, this little sort of little mountain, big mountain thing, or you can press plus and minus on the keyboard to zoom in and out of this. It's actually the dash and equals, but I always think of it as plus and minus. Or in my case, I have a roller on my mouse, and that allows me to zoom in and out of both the composition by just rolling on it, and also I think if I option roll, it makes my timeline bigger and shorter. So yeah, so you can try that too if you have a roller mouse. All right. So I think this looks good. Oh, I need to set this back, sorry. So I'm going to get in here, and I'm going to zoom all the way in, like I was saying. I forgot what I was saying. And now I'm just going to grab these keyframes and just make sure that they line up perfectly with that. And I just want to stress that the reason that these two things look like they're moving in perfect sync when they move is because, okay, they are moving the same number of pixels over the same number of frames, okay? Woo! Okay, cool. So let's move on to the next little shot here, okay? And I think what's going to happen is, the way I kind of planned this is with the arrow moving out to the side here, that the next thing will happen is the arrow will kind of move on from this side, from the left, and it'll form a kind of weird continuity. You'll see as we do it. So I'm going to select this, and now I'm going to hit Option-Command-B again to set my work area just for this. And additionally, I'm going to just close these up so this is as neat and tidy as possible. Pausing this for a sec because I forgot to explain the really simple keyboard shortcuts for setting the beginning and end of the work area. Wherever your current time indicator is, if you press B, you will set the beginning, B for beginning, of the work area to wherever you are. And then also if you press N at any other place along the timeline with your current time indicator, you will set the end of the work area right there. So B and N set the beginning and end, okay, of your work area. All right, so again, this is a pretty good spot for my arrow to land. So I'm going to move back to the beginning, and I'm going to hit Shift Page Down to move 10 frames. And then I'm going to move like page down, page down, page down, page down, page down until I've moved about 15 frames, okay? And I'm going to press P, and I'm going to reveal my position, and that's right, you guessed it, astute, keen After Effects observers. I'm going to press this stopwatch button, okay? And then I'm going to press a new shortcut, which I'm going to tell you about right now, which is I and O, okay, on the keyboard. I and O take you to the in point and the out point of a layer, which just means the beginning and an end of a layer, okay? So I, in point, equals beginning. So if I press I, I'll jump back to the in point or beginning of my layer. If I press O, I'll jump to the out point or end of my layer. Okay, so I'm going to press I, go to the beginning of the layer, and now I'm going to grab my arrow and I'm just going to move it off screen. Okay, so it kind of flies on like we did before. No biggie. But now I have to show you something new, and I'm going to build a little scale animation so that this clicks. Okay, and I kind of want to do this in a special way, and we need to kind of talk about this for 1 second. So one of the principal strategies in animation is to have really, really clear communication on screen. If the audience doesn't see something happen, it's sort of like it never happened, right? So animators tend to use a process called three-part action because it's sort of the clearest way to put action on screen and have it be noticed by the audience, okay? And I'm going to throw some animation terms at you, and these are a bit advanced, but the three parts of the action are anticipation, and then action, and then reaction, okay? And the anticipation is kind of like the moment before. It's like the wind-up of the pitch, okay? And then the action is the pitch itself, and then the reaction is the way that the pitcher's body kind of follows through after the ball leaves their hand, all right? So this just makes for really clear action on screen, and I don't want to get too advanced, but the way that I'm going to animate the scale is in three parts, okay? I'm going to hit Shift and S to reveal my scale. The reason I hit Shift is so that I could see the position keyframes on there as well, right? If I just hit S, I would have just revealed the scale, okay? So now this comes in and it's going to pause a few frames, and I'm going to make a a scale keyframe at 100 by, that's right, pressing the stopwatch, okay? And now this is going to be a really quick animation. It's just like a little click. And I should also notice, like, here's my arrow in real life, and when I click, I'm not like doing anything. So I'm going to kind of exaggerate the way an arrow would actually work, but I think it'll make the action clearer and it'll be easier to see. So that's my goal, right? So I'm going to go like 4 or 5 frames. Let's say 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. Now, first I'm going to make this anticipate, which is I'm going to have it get bigger first, and it's going to kind of look almost like it's rearing back just a little bit. And I don't need to do this too much, so I'm going to click in here and I'm going to type 115. Right. So it gets like a little bit bigger, and it gets bigger according to its own position anchor point. Right. So it gets a little bit bigger. And then I'm going to do this very quick animation, like 2 frames, okay? Which is very, very, very quick because, you know, at 30 frames per second, 1 frame is a 30th of a second. So 2 frames is 1/15th of a second. So it's really quick, right? And that's what's going to make this animation really good. So now I'm going to set this down to like 90, okay? So it's like gotten bigger and then smaller really quickly. And then I'm going to go like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 more frames or something. And okay, so I want to set this back to 100, and I remember that this keyframe here is 100 at the scale, so I can just copy and paste that, right? And so now I've created an animation of a little click, and I want you to check this out so you can see what I just did, all right? So it got like a little bit of action beforehand, and what we might do is actually, this might be a little too slow, so I might pull this back 1 frame and see what that looks like. Yeah, I kind of like that better. I feel like you can really see this happen. It gets bigger, and then it gets smaller, and then it returns to its size. And the fast part is the snap down, where it goes from being big to small, right? So I kind of like this. So I'm going to use that as my animation there. And I hope that made sense. I think it did. And we'll go through more stuff like this as we work. So now, what needs to happen is this slider actually should be off and just start right here. So I need to trim this layer so that it starts right here because I want it to look like it's coming on when it gets clicked, okay? So the way to do that is if I hover over the end of my layer here, you can see that my arrow cursor changes to this sort of like double arrow that's pointing in 2 different ways, all right? So now that means that I can kind of take the end of this and just click it back, and I held Shift to snap it right into the current time indicator, right? There is a keyboard shortcut for this, which is Option, Command, and left bracket. The brackets control the ends of your layers because they sort of look like that, but we'll go into that further at a different lesson, so you don't need to know that right now. I just thought I'd mention it, okay? So let's check this out. It comes on, and it's going to do this little scale animation and click on this and sort of select it, all right? So let's check this out. All right, cool. So I actually think that this would look more effective. Now that I see it, I want to play with moving when the white like thing, whatever this is, comes on. I think it's almost like a little too sudden there. I'm going to walk back 1 more frame, and I'm going to trim this back there. And I want to see what that looks like, because I think it's happening too quickly for that to all read at the same time. So let's check that out. Yeah, as I suspected, I think this just reads a little bit better. It's a little bit easier to see. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm always going to have this start 1 frame after the click with this animation. All right? It's personal preference. If that doesn't look good to you, then you shouldn't do it that way, okay? Animation is all about your eye and developing the way you want things to move on screen, all right? So this is the way I want it to move on screen, but right, if you don't think it looks good, then you should not do that. All right. So let's move on. So this comes down and clicks, and now what we're going to do is have a little bit of a pause, right? And I'm going to now essentially click this here to do that thing where I make a new keyframe at these values, or I could have copied and pasted that. And then I'm going to select my slider, and I'm going to press P and reveal the position, and I'm going to click that stopwatch too. Yes, that's right. And now they're both have keyframes lined up together, right? And now let's move, I don't know, like that far over or something. I'm just going to do this by eye, and then we'll change this. And again, I'm going to select this and this, and I did that by hitting Command and selecting them both. All right. I'm going to move in, and what I'm going to do is just pull this over. I'm holding down on Shift, by the way, so that I can't accidentally move this up and down, because I know that I just want to completely parallel move to itself, right? So I'm holding down on Shift. Otherwise, I'd be moving it like up and down, right? So Shift kind of locks it in place. I'm going to kind of get this close, but not quite right on the money. And then what I'm going to do is use my arrow keys on my keyboard to kind of click this into place and just make sure, yep, right there, it looks like it clicked in place. Now, let me pull back. And let's look at that animation. Yep. Yeah, and that looks really good. I think right now the timings are way too fast on that move across. But let's go ahead and now I'm gonna copy and paste this keyframe, because this is like another little pause here. And then I'm gonna press O to move to my out point, right? And now I'm gonna move my mouse over. All right. So that's the basic animation. We could preview that. I still think that looks too fast in the middle, so I'm going to have to change these keyframe timings. And I'm going to have to be careful, because this layer begins right here very specifically, and if I change the timings, I might have to change where that layer starts. Okay, so let's see. I'm going to pull this back a few frames, and I am going to pull this back a few frames too. And so that means that now this layer has to start one frame after that keyframe, so I'm going to just pull that back. Oops. Make sure that you're like not moving the layer back, which changes the keyframe timings, which is what I almost did, but more instead trimming the layer back, right? Okay. So then that moves over, and I think I could make this a little bit shorter and make this a little bit longer. And let's see if that changes it. Okay, let's see what that looks like. Yeah, I think that's looking a little bit better. The timing seems more consistent, right? Cool. So let us now go on to our next shot. All right, so I'm going to pull back, and I'm going to just collapse all those down, and I'm going to select this and Option Command B to set my work area just for this. And now let's look at this shot. Now this is one of the more complicated shots, and the first thing that we realize is we're going to have to set guides for this layer, because we need this to pull to be exactly in line with the edge of this arrow. Okay, so I already have my rulers on for this comp, but if those are not on, these are the rulers up here, and this is where you pull the guides, then you need to press Command R if they're off to turn them back on again. So Command R turns on your rulers, and then you click in here and you pull a guide out. And it's going to be kind of hard to see my guide a little bit because my background's light blue and the guides are light blue, but if we get in close, you can kind of hopefully see that there's a guide right there. I hope you could see that. In any case, I'm going to grab another guide and put that one right here, and we can zoom in and just make sure that that's touching the edge there, which it is. Great. So now with those guides there, it's actually going to really help us out because the animation, I think we're going to kind of be able to snap the animation into place. So I also have snap to guides on, so if you don't have that on, you might want to turn that on. I find that's really handy, okay, and that will help me here. So first things first, we need to have the arrow come on. So let me move, let me go to my in point by pressing I, and let's move like 10 frames, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and start about 15 frames in, and I'm going to press P, and guess what I'm going to do? That's right, I'm going to press that stopwatch button. Okay, and now I'm going to go back to the beginning. I'm just going to keep making that joke until it sinks in, right? And now I'm going to drag this back here like I've done many other times. Okay, so now that comes in, we can see the position path. And now I need a little bit of a pause, just a couple of frames here, while this kind of changes its mind to do the next thing. So I'm going to copy and paste that keyframe right there. And then here's my blue square, which actually this is the square that I want here, my gray square. So I'm going to press P and do that same thing again, which is Click that. And now, since this comes on and pauses, we can now move, I don't know, just a little bit down in time. And let's take, I'm going to select this and then Command and select my arrow. If I hit Shift, by the way, I would select this middle layer as well, which I don't want. So I can unselect that, by the way, by commanding as well. So Command and Command to select that. And now here we go. I'm going to grab these and I'm going to move these over. Yep, and it clicked right into place there because I have Snap to Guide, so that's really useful. Okay, so that comes over and grabs that and moves it over, and we'll adjust the timings later, as is my way. And now I need this to pause here, the arrow to pause here again, because it shouldn't just move directly off, so I'm going to copy and paste that, or I could have hit that button. And now I'll move a little bit down, and I'm going to have this now move over, and I'm not going to have it move exactly parallel now and hold Shift, because I want it to have a little bit of an angle to it, so it looks more like a human being is moving this. And we will talk about another method for that at the end of this, once I animate this whole thing, and I'll show you that too. So this kind of moves over, and now we needed to do the same kind of pause here, and that's already selected, so I can just kind of copy and paste that keyframe, and now go here and press P, and you guessed it, click that stopwatch, right? I hope that's sinking in now. And now I'll move forward in time, roughly the same as this, okay? And this is selected, and now I'll Command select the arrow layer as well. And I will hold Shift again and kind of snap those over until they click right there, okay? And now I move a couple more frames, and I can copy and paste that keyframe, and now go to the end, and zoom back a little, and just... Oops, I'm grabbing my guide by accident, so I don't need those guides anymore, so I'm going to hit Command and colon, which turns the guides on and off like this, right? Okay, so with them off, I'm going to now move this over to the side like that. And let's preview that and see about those timings. Cool. So looking pretty good. I think it's just looking a little bit pokey in a few places, a little bit slow. So I think what I would do is, let's see. I like the opening's okay, but I think the pauses are too short. So I'm going to take these two keyframes for the start of this move across here, and I'm going to move this back a couple frames, and let's see what that feels like. Feels a little better to me, yeah. Yep. I like that. And now I'm going to do the same thing and put roughly the same amount of space, you know, in this pause here. So it's a couple more frames over. And I moved the first keyframe, by the way, of the arrow move off with those keyframes because I just wanted to shove all those timings down. But I did not want to adjust the timing of when the arrow moves off this final keyframe because that still needs to be on the last frame, right? So now it pauses a little bit longer. We could even do the same thing and just have this move over a little bit too so that the pause there is a little bit better. So let's check that out. Yeah, cool. I think it looks great. The only thing that I think is that little move right there is too slow. It's just too slow. It doesn't move that far. So I'm actually going to grab these keyframes here, including the first keyframe of the move off, and shove these back a little bit. Maybe not that much, but like that. Yep. I still think that looks a little slow, so I might even increase the pause here a couple frames and this pause on the end. Let's see what that looks like. Yeah, I think that looks better that way. Okay, that's looking great. So what I'm going to do now is select all and collapse down one of these open ones to just close that up. And I will select this now and choose, press Option Command B to highlight the work area just for this one layer. Okay, so in this last scene, what happens is this comes on and presses this button, which turns this on, and then this little kind of slider thing should fill that little bar. Okay, so again, this is a pretty good first position for the arrow. So I'm going to hit Shift page down and then page down, page down, page down, page down, page down to move 15 frames. And I'm going to select this and hit P. And oh, I think you know what I'm going to do next. That's right. Now we're going to go back to the beginning by pressing I for the in point. And now I'm going to move this off screen here. Great. So that now comes on. And what I'm going to do now is actually, I need the little same select, you know, with a little sort of scale action, the 3-part action. So I'm actually going to cheat this, and I'm just going to grab it from over here. I think it was this arrow. Yep. So I pressed S, and now I can see the scale animation there. And I'm just going to select this. I thought it was good, and I'm just going to copy and paste all those keyframes. And then I can close that back up. And I can select this now, and I'm going to move a few frames forward, right? And then I'm just going to hit Command V and paste. And then if I press U, well, I have to press it twice. If I press U twice, I can see that the scale animation is now in there. And now, because this anchor point was the exact same position as on the other arrow, and because they're all the same size and everything, they're really identical layers, this will now work the same way as it did in the other one. So that's kind of cool. So I didn't even have to redo that animation since I was happy with it. Now I remember from the last time that I need to go one frame past the click down to make the best possible turn on for this button. So I'm going to go there, and I'm going to turn my button on, and now I'm going to, I can either Option and bracket, left bracket, trim that. I think I said Option Command bracket before, but I just meant Option bracket, trims. And again, we'll go over all that in another lesson. So probably the easiest thing to do is just hover over the end here and just snap that back into place to the CTI. And so now, here, let's preview that. Right, so it comes in and it clicks down, and then comes in and clicks down. Great. And what I might even want to do to make this action a little bit stronger is put a little bit of a scale animation also on the button. We didn't do this on the other one, but I think this would be kind of cool to show you. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the beginning of this, just when this turns on right there. And I'm going to, actually, I lied. I got to jump back one sec before I do that animation. And I need to turn this the gray button off at the same time that this blue one turns on. And this actually is a really important thing, because if you go to the in point or the in position or the first frame of this layer, button blue, and then select this and let's see, trim this back right here, which might seem like the logical thing to do, that one should start and the other should end all in the same frame. But I'm going to use my little big mountain as a little mountain tool and zoom all the way in here. And you can see that when you do that, you create a one frame overlap. I think I talked about this before in the things that will trip you up lesson, but just make sure that you always have your layers line up like that. So the last frame of one happens, and then the first frame of the next one happens like that, right? And it can be really hard to see that when you're zoomed all the way back, right? So the way that I usually do that is, you know, I'll move here, and I'll trim this there, and then I'll page up one frame forward, and I'll trim that one there, okay? I know that's a lot to take in, but we're covering a lot of ground today, so we're almost done, and your brain is like completely filled up with stuff, but just keep it a little further open, all right? So I'm going to go to the beginning here, and now this layer turns off, and the other one turns on, and so now I can do this animation. What I want to do is have the button react to the press as though it got smaller and then was getting a little bit bigger again. So I'm going to press S and reveal the scale property. And I'm actually going to go here to this frame, and that's where I'm going to press my 100% stopwatch to make the keyframe, right? And now I'm going to roll back or press I to go back to the beginning or the end point of the layer. And I just want to change this value to like 90, all right? So now I've created a little animation. Well, here, let me preview it for you before I tell you what it should look like. Click, right? And you can really feel that. You feel it coming back up, and it almost like helps complete the action of the press, right? So I think that's kind of cool. You might think about that. And you can even see, like, well, if this is like 1 frame or 2 frames longer, does it feel too long? And let's check that out. And, you know, again, personal preference. I think I like it quicker, so I would put it there. But your eye might say something different, so you should put it somewhere else, all right? Cool, I love that. And now let's move on. So what happens next is we've got this blue slider. And this also needs to be trimmed, probably around here or someplace after the button press. So I'm just going to hover over that and just trim that back like that, right? Remember, not moving the layer, but just trimming it, okay? And so here is a little bit tricky. What we need to do is have this grow bigger, right? And I think the easiest way to do this is to make it a scale animation and unchain the scale, sort of like I mentioned before. So what I'm going to do is I need to set the anchor point, though, down to here. Because when I want this to scale, I want it to scale from the bottom point and not from its own center. Here, this is worth showing you. If I scale this now, even if I unchain this, remember this is X, meaning the horizontal, And this value is Y, meaning the up and down, so that's the one we want to animate this on, is the Y value. After Effects, whether it's position or whatever, if there's two values like that, the first one is always the X and the second one is always the Y, except for, I guess, rotation, which has the full rotation and then the degree rotation, but mostly X and Y, okay? So watch this. If I move this, if I scale this down, the animation will look like this. It'll shrink down from its own center, which is not what I want. I'm going to press undo. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to choose my pan behind tool, again this one, or Y is the shortcut, and I'm going to take this anchor point and I'm going to grab it, and I'm not moving the layer, just the anchor point, and I'm going to move it down toward the bottom, and then I'm going to hit Command, and that's going to kind of snap it. Oops, it actually didn't do it. It's going to snap it, maybe you have to get a little closer, right to the bottom there. Okay, so that's exactly the pixels at the bottom of that thing, which could be a little bit hard to see sometimes, right? So that's a really useful thing. And now, if with the unchained scale, if I just twirl the Y value, you can see that I'm kind of making an animation like this, which is what we want, right? So I'm going to set this to 0, right? And I'm going to, which means it's pretty much invisible. And I'm going to, right at the start here, I'm going to make a keyframe by, that's right, pressing that button. I'll stop that soon, don't worry. And then this animation I actually want to take a while. I want this to be like, brrrr, right? Since it doesn't cover a lot of area, what I'm going to do is actually, I'm going to move quite a ways down compared to everything else. This is going to be kind of the slowest animation that we have in the sequence, all right? And so now I'm going to just click on this and type 100. It's probably easier that way than kind of dialing it up, because you want it to hit 100 exactly, because if we were at like 99 or whatever, we'd see a little bit of the white, and if we were at 110, it would kind of go over the top. So I'm just going to set that to 100, and that's good. And now all I have to do is move a few frames down and grab my arrow, and I'm going to build essentially that pause in, except for that the pause was happening over a longer time, but I'm going to copy and paste that so that that arrow value doesn't change at all while that's happening, right? And then I'll just hit O, and for the final time I will choose my V arrow by pressing V and moving this off screen like that. And let me hit N here at the end to press my work area so that it ends at the end. And let's preview that together. Yep. Boop. Yeah, I think that looks great. I think the move off at the end could be a little bit longer, a little bit slower here, since it is the end. So I'm going to actually take that and the final of the scale up, because that is a little bit maybe too slow. I think I can spare a few frames there and move those both back, right? And let's see what that looks like. Yeah, I think that looks cool. And what we can even do is, it's still a little bit slow, we can move that back, and now we can actually have this, so instead of it being the very last frame at which it moves off screen, I can pull this back a few frames so that it's out and there's like a tiny little bit of a pause before the sequence ends. So let's see, and I could even make that a little bit longer. Let's see what that looks like. Click. Yeah. Yeah, I think that looks really good. I'm really pleased with it. So what I'm going to do now is press Home. I lied. I'm going to select all and collapse all these down. And now I'm going to press Home and press B. Home button, by the way, takes you to the beginning frame of your animation, which I should really explain this. I don't think I have. That these numbers here, these indicate like where we are in the comp, right? So it's a really easy way to see where we are if you can read timecode, which I'm not quite sure if you guys can, and that's no big deal, and it's really easy, okay? Timecode values are listed as hours, minutes, seconds, and then frames. So this 08 here, that is 3 seconds and 8 frames. And I should really explain a base 30, the way that works, in case you're not a math person like myself, is you start off at frame 0, right? And then you count up, frame 1, frame 2, frame 3, all the way up to frame 29 here. So here I am at frame, 29. Okay, I gave it away there. And when I go one more frame in a base 30 kind of timecode situation, I don't reach 30. Instead, I get to 1 second. So after 29 frames, the next frame is 1 second and 0 frames, like this, right? Okay, so you see that there. So that's 1 second. And then obviously you get to like 1 second and 29 frames, and then the next frame is 2 seconds. So that's how that works, right? So let's preview down this animation now that I've bored you with that, and check this out. Cool, I think that looks really great. The only thing that I would probably do is, I think the timings on number 2 here are just a little bit too fast, and I think this could be a really instructive thing. Right now, the comp length is set kind of exactly to the length of the end of my last frame here. So if I wanted to add more time into this comp, how would I do that? Well, it's a little bit of a pain, but what I would do is hit Command K, okay, and that opens these composition settings, sort of like when you first create the composition. And now we just need to add some time into the duration. Like if I add, I think, 2 more seconds in, it'll be plenty. So remember, this is hours, minutes, seconds, and frames, so I need to make this 13 seconds and 2 frames for whatever reason. I don't know why it's like that. And then I hit OK. And now if I zoom back in here, I see I've got this blank space here. Okay? So now what I have to do is unlock my background, and this is really important. Unlock the background and kind of hover over the edge till I can trim that and drag that back. It's like expanding it. It's not really trimming it. And what I could do is select this and hold Shift and select all of these layers. And now kind of move the end of this back to here. And I don't know exactly how long I want to make this yet, so that's good. I just wanted to create some blank space here so that I can go ahead and increase the length of this little shot here. Okay, so I'm going to press U, and here's all the animated properties for this. So let's just say for right now, let's try adding a second onto that. So I'm going to hit Shift and page down. Actually, that seems like a long time. I'm going to try 20 frames. So I'm going to hit Shift and page down twice. 1, 2, okay. And now what I can do is, all these are selected, so I can kind of trim all those back at the same time or expand them back. And now you see, I just have to readjust where these keyframes fall. I'm also going to select this and press Option Command B so I can set my work area to just the length of this so when I preview it. All right? So I'm going to take the last 2 keyframes. And again, this is a very typical thing for an animator to have to do, all right? You just do not always get the timings right away. So I'm going to take these keyframes and I'm going to move these down toward the end so that that one falls now at the out point there. And I'm going to make this a little bit longer by increasing that, right? And basically, I'm just going to take all of these keyframes and move these down a little bit, an indeterminate number yet. I'm going to kind of make this a little bit longer by a few frames, and I'm just doing some surgery on this. And now I'm going to kind of put, this is the scale animation here. Kind of try to center that between these two, and maybe even make this a little bit longer, and maybe even move this to the side. And now I'm just guessing, but remember again that this layer here, this coming on, needs to come on 1 frame after this click down right there. So I'm going to move page down 1 frame, and I'm going to trim this right there. Okay, so let's see what that looks like with the timings changed around like that. Yep, it looks just a little bit more like the rest of the pacing of the rest of the piece, I think. So I'm okay with that, all right? And if we want, we can even go back to the beginning, home, and press B, and we can watch the first 2 together. Yeah, and they seem to match better. Like when this goes off, it matches the pace of that coming on. And by the way, you see the continuity as this moves off and this comes on from the side. It kind of provides this weird, like, video game continuity where things that move off to the right kind of come on to the left. I always love that gag. Right, so great. So if we love the timings on this now, what I'm going to do is go to my last frame of this, and I'm going to actually select all and collapse that down so it's a little neater, and I'm going to go 1 more frame by pressing page down, and now I'm into this blank area. And I'm going to select all of these, again, Shift and select them, and now I'm going to move in close, and I'm going to kind of snap this back, and I just want to get in really close. I'm using my roller on my mouse, but you can use this mountain button. Get in all the way. Just make sure that goes right there so that they line up so that one ends and then the next starts, right like that, okay? Really important. And then I can go to my end here, or select this and press O and then N, and now I could either get rid of this empty space, but let me first make sure that I do like this. All right. I think the animation looks great, but I want to tell you about how we can take this one step farther and make it look a little bit more naturalistic, okay, which is generally speaking almost always what we're going for when we animate, all right? So one thing about this animation that looks unrealistic is that the mouse moves in completely straight lines, which is just never the way a human hand would ever move something like that. It's too robotic for a person. When we move, and this is actually one of the principles of cell animation, is that when humans move, or animals, they move in arcs. And almost everything does. Like if you throw a ball, it's not going to move in a straight line. It's going to actually go in an arc and, rise and then fall. And everything works that way. Everything moves in arcs, especially like when we move our limbs and things, they tend to move in arcs, right? So a hand moving a mouse would tend to move it in an arc rather than in a straight line, okay? So let's look at this. How would we actually add arcs to this position path, right? Well, the answer is, and again, this is something we're going to go over a lot farther in a different lesson, but if we choose our pen tool, which is G, the shortcut, and then we actually pull down this menu, we can see this Convert Vertex tool, all right? So why don't you go ahead and click that, and it looks like kind of an upside down V or something. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to select this, and I'm going to press P to show my position path for my arrow. And now, what I think should be clear to you is that this keyframe here is represented by this point along the path, and this keyframe here is represented by the next one, etc. And if I click on this with my Convert Vertex tool on this first keyframe point, I can click, and now it's a little hard to see, but it's put a Bezier handle on this, which I can adjust, right? And that's kind of what we want to do. We don't need to make this move go like crazy in some nutty arc like that, but just subtle like that. And now it'll move like that, right? And we don't want to add an arc onto this, because what happens here is, okay, so this keyframe is, our next one, but then the keyframe after that is in exactly the same position, because one's a copy of the other, as you recall, right? So we would have to be a little bit careful here. If we do want to add an arced handle onto the incoming side of this, you should make sure to select that first, okay, and then click on this, and then you'll know you're working with that keyframe and not the identical one that's a few frames away. Now in this case, I don't think you have to do that, but if you wanted to put like a bigger arc, or some kind of funny shape like this where it kind of moves, I'm not suggesting you do this, but if you wanted to do a non-straight arc or whatever, you could do that this way. Just be careful about that next keyframe, that you don't accidentally kind of put a Bezier handle on this, because if I put a Bezier handle on, if I select this one, the identical copy, the pause, right, and I now click on this, I could accidentally create a situation where I didn't actually, but I could have created a situation where it's got that little weird jog around in there. So I'm going to suggest you do not do that, but instead you go like now to here. This is now the second pause before it moves off, and so we could select this and click on it with that tool and put our little arc on, and we could also select this. You don't even have to be on the keyframe to select it, just so After Effects knows which one you're talking about, right? And then do something like this. So now let's check this out. And let me actually hit Option-Command-B so we can just look at this shot. Right? I think it's a little exaggerated on the first one, so I would probably take this down a little bit. I think I kind of overdid that a little bit, right? So maybe like this. Yeah? And so it's just a little bit more naturalistic. It's not something you necessarily totally feel, or you could have this one, for example, move like arc down a little bit instead of up, right? Like that. Yeah, maybe that feels just a little bit more like a human hand is touching this thing. So let's go ahead and do that for all of these, all right? Real quick. I know this lecture is getting a little bit long, so I'm going to convert this. I've still got my Convert Vertex tool selected. Do that. Select this one now. That, put a little arc in it. Don't overdo it. Now, make sure to select this one. Don't just click on there, because you probably will select the first one by accident, which you don't want. So click there. And let's just arc these two off like that, right? And I'm going to go ahead and just do this for all of them. What the heck? All right. I think this makes a difference, and I think you should do this in your homework unless it's too confusing for you. And you can actually do a better job with these arcs even than I can. Just follow my... Ooh, yes, I clicked on something, I made a mistake. Awesome. Okay, it's really easy to do. I thought this was the next keyframe, but it's actually this here, and so I clicked on that. So select it and click on it, right? It's good to see the teacher make some mistakes. Okay, a little bit of an arc, don't have to go crazy here. Okay, now, and I don't think that needs to arc so much, okay? So, that's good, and I just want to do this at the end, so I'm going to select this one, and I'll click there and put my little curve on there, and I will select this one and click there and also put a little curve on there, right? And I think you get this now. Well, okay, I'll do all of them, whatever. It's just two in the end. I'm just being impatient. Okay, so select this and click it, and let's have this. No, okay, whatever. I'm gonna have it come on like that, and this there, click. All right, and we could have this kind of come into a little bit more of a landing there, and then here, select this one. I know this is tedious. Whoops, and what you want to do is just click. Don't click and drag. So click, and then click. And we can have this one arc off toward the bottom as well, right? So, okay, great. So let's go to the end now, and let's watch that down. Okay, that looks awesome. I love it. It's definitely the best thing I've ever animated. So cool. In real life, the next thing that I would do would be to render this video. And that's the process by which I take it from After Effects, where right now it exists only in the RAM of my computer and not as an actual physical digital object, right? So I need to take it from that state and actually turn it into something like a QuickTime movie that I could, for example, upload to Vimeo or email to somebody like a client or whatever. So that process is known as rendering in After Effects. So I actually recorded a whole separate video about rendering, which you should definitely watch next, I think. And it takes you into greater detail and sort of shows you how to set up your render queue so that you kind of automate the process and you don't need to press so many buttons and things. But I'm just going to kind of walk you through right now, and you can watch me render this video out. But then when you'll have more questions about it, and you can look at this separate video that I made called Rendered Speechless. That definitely goes into plenty of detail, possibly too much even, so definitely check that out next, okay? So what I would do is, in my comp here, I would go up to Composition and Add to a Render Queue, which is a very fancy term, Render Queue. And so, okay, this right here is the preset output that I explain how to make for you in the separate video. So I'm not going to talk about this at all, but you should definitely watch that, like I said. And the only thing that I would do other than that is just click on Output 2 and select, you know, a folder, like a render folder where I'd want this to render to, and I can call this Knoll Lecture Comp or whatever. That's just what my composition was called. And I can hit Save now, right? And now I will hit the magical render button, and you will watch this blue line, I think it is, fill up here, and then we shall hear the magical render chime together. So let's go ahead and do this. It's rendering. It's rendering. You see it sort of acts out the shots on screen so you can watch them. And this line is kind of moving across. A little bit slower than I would hope for, but there you go. Just waiting for that magical chime sound, which is going to happen any minute now. And once you hear that magical sound, that means your render is done, and this lecture is almost done too. So all you would need to do is in your render queue, After Effects provides a handy-dandy little link for you. So if you twirl down where it says Output Module, there's a little live link here that you can click on, and that will open up your render folder or whatever you rendered it to, right? And now you can actually double-click this and open it in QuickTime and play it down. Okay, that looks awesome, and now I definitely recommend that you go on to check out that rendering video and then look at the exercise 1 video to see what your homework's all about. Thank you very much.
If you had a microscope and could look at a piece of a leaf, you would see thousands of tiny openings which branch out until the leaf has all of the materials it needs. What happens now?